You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today we talk all about Christmas movies. Ho, ho, ho! And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Hi, guys.
Ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, could you do that ho, ho, ho one more time?
Be glad to, guys. Ho, ho, ho.
That was very, very good ho, ho, ho's.
I think the second one was the best one. Let's take that take.
I think that next year when we do pirate movies, we can turn it into a yo ho ho. So, Arthur, I want to start out and ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that the reason that the Christmas movie season is so important to Hollywood is mostly because everybody's trying to position their Academy Award movies?
Oh, yes and no. Yes, for those kind of movies that would be Academy Award contenders, story-driven films, some foreign films, things like that, intelligent films. Yes, the position for the Oscars. They have to come out before the end of the year. Certainly no, as it relates to box office, commercial movies, you go because you want to take advantage of the Christmas holidays. That's as great a time of year for movie box office as any. Certainly the summertime is probably the best for movies. But those 10 days or 14 days of Christmas, starting certainly with Christmas, are gold. That's why they release at Christmas, commercial movies.
And the kids are out of school, obviously, and they can go every day.
Yes. And that includes certainly little kids with Disney-type movies and animated kind of films, family-type movies. But it's just great movie-going time. I think anybody involved with the film business understands that. The two golden times of a year would be the Christmas period and summertime, a couple of months of summer.
So do you remember the first Christmas movie you ever saw?
You know, I don't. It could be not that it was really a Christmas movie, but it had some great Christmas stuff in it, which was probably Meet Me in St. Louis. I was a little kid, but I loved it. And I love the song in that movie, which has lasted forever. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which has just become a standard. That was a beautiful movie in many ways. Vincent Minnelli, I think. Is that right, Julian? Vincent Minnelli?
Definitely Vincent Minnelli. And that's how Judy and he got together, Judy Garland.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't really what you call per se a Christmas movie, but it had Christmas. It was a family movie, and Christmas was a good part of it. When it turned to be snow and Christmas, and Judy Garland looks out that window and sings, "Have yourself a merry little." Nothing like it. It was great.
What about you, Julian?
I want to just say one thing, Stephen, Arthur, Mike. I looked up the original lyric of "Have Yourself a Merry Christmas," a Merry Little Christmas. One of the lyrics was, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas. It may be your last. Next year, we may be all living in the past." They decided to take that out. Good decision.
Because they were supposedly moving to New York from St. Louis.
That's right. And Leon Ames was the father. Oh, golly, what a wonderful movie. But the trolley song is the one that I just think is so sensational. And when I saw Judy Garland at the Palace, she sang that trolley song. So it was great to see it. I don't remember my first movie, Steve, because this Christmas idea of a Christmas movie can be so many different theories about what they would be. Is it a Christmas background? Is it this Christmas story? But the film I would love to talk about is The Bishop's Wife. Are we ready to start talking about some films?
Absolutely. Julian, we hand it over to you. You have the sleigh bell.
All right. Well, The Bishop's Wife has more stories than any movie I think I've ever studied. But we'll start out with the fact that it had 5 Academy Awards nominations, and it was including Best Picture. And it was originally a story that RKO bought for Cary Grant. Anyhow, Cary Grant was not sure he wanted to do it, but Sam Goldwyn bought it from RKO and decided to produce it. Now, he was coming off The Best Years of Our Life, so he wanted Teresa Wright to be the lead female, the bishop's wife, and he wanted Dana Andrews as the bishop and Dana Andrews as the angel and Dana Andrews the bishop. Cary Grant didn't want to do it at that point. Anyhow, to make a long story a little bit longer, they finally get Teresa Wright has to leave because she's pregnant, and now they shoot the movie with a director named William Seiter, Seiter. If you look him up, you'll see he directed probably 150 movies, and not many of them were very successful, but he was able to bring them in on budget, and they didn't lose too much. But he shoots the movie with Cary Grant and David Niven as the angel. Cary Grant is the bishop's wife, and Goldwyn looks at the rushes and says, "I don't like this. This is no good." He fires William Seiter, and he brings in a German director named Henry Koster, who was quite well known at Universal. And
let me interrupt you just for a moment. For the listeners who've never seen The Bishop's Wife, give us the log line of what the story's about.
Well, there's a bishop who's trying very hard to build a new church, and he's getting frustrated by it. His wife is unhappy because she's being neglected. He can't get the money that he wants, and somehow an angel comes down to take care of all this. And as I say, Cary Grant originally was going to be the bishop. And after all, the film is called The Bishop's Wife, and he's the star, so the bishop wife. Okay. And David Niven is the angel. So they shoot that, and they scrub that, and Goldwyn says, "I want you to switch roles. I want you, David Niven, to become the bishop, and I want you, Mr. Cary Grant, to be the angel." Now, I have a terrific bitching feeling about the computer and the internet, because you cannot get a straight answer, and this is a perfect example. Was it Sam Goldwyn who decided to do this? Was it Henry Koster who decided, the director that wanted it? Or was it Cary Grant himself? Well, on the internet, Cary Grant doesn't want to do it because he's considered the bishop, as I said, but then in some cases he did want it. So you can't get a straight answer on it. What we do know, and what's interesting, is that Goldwyn, how many producers do you know that could say, okay, I've shot a couple of weeks, I'm throwing everything out, I'm switching the roles of the men, and that's what he's going to do. And he did it. The
only other example of that is Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis replacing Eric Stoltz in Back to the Future after having shot for 6 weeks, and they brought in Michael J. Fox, which was stunning. They just didn't feel Eric Stoltz was funny enough.
Mm.
There are other examples of switching people in cast, maybe not as substantial as those, but in The Bishop's Wife, the beauty of that story is it's about an angel, right? And
yes. Well, the film opens up, guys, and it doesn't do business. It's not successful. And either Goldwyn or his people come up with this great idea. We're going to now call the movie Carrie and the Bishop's Wife, which gives it a salacious possibility of Carrie and the Bishop's Wife. And it did change the box office, a supposedly 25% increase, and made it a successful movie.
How beautiful in this movie is Loretta Young?
Loretta Young was quite beautiful, and she was only 34 years old when she made them. Yeah.
Great movie. Before we get to Steve, we certainly want to know, Steve, what your first Christmas movie is or was, or your favorite. But I just, Sam Goldwyn, this man who had taste like almost nobody, had great taste in movies, and so many examples, Best Years of Our Lives, it just doesn't get better than that. And great taste. but he spoke his own kind of English, and he had come from Eastern Europe. And I've often thought if he could have a conversation with Yogi Berra, this would be one of the great conversations of all time. Sam Goldwyn, just to take a little break for a second, some of the so-called Goldwynisms. And he said things like, give me a couple of years and I'll make that actress an overnight success. That was his English. Yeah. Somebody went to him and said, Mr. Goldwyn, they won't let us use lesbians in the movie. He said, so what? Get Austrians. Sam Goldwyn. I read part of it all the way through. If I look confused, it's because I'm thinking. When I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. Sam Goldwyn. I don't want yes men around me. I want everyone to tell the truth, even if it costs them their job. So this Sam Goldwyn, you mentioned, I did not know he was involved with the bishop's wife.
Yes, he produced it.
Makes sense.
And his real name was Samuel Goldfish.
Samuel Goldfish.
Yeah.
Metro Goldwyn Mayer.
Which rings a lot better than Metro Goldfish Mayer.
Oh, yeah, right.
And the only studio head who owned his own movies. He owned his movies.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah. He, in fact, to this day, the Goldwyn Company still owns these incredible films.
But he made quality films.
He did.
Was Hans Christian Andersen his?
Did what?
Hans Christian Andersen? Was that his movie?
Oh, absolutely. He produced it. Yes, yeah. No, I mean, Arthur, he also said, if I want messages, I'll use Western Union.
Right.
For movies.
Well, my first being a baby boomer, I discovered a lot of my first movie experiences on the television. And in our household, when it came time for Christmas, a movie came on TV called Miracle on 34th Street. And I have to tell you that to this day, I can still watch that movie and have as much fun as I had when I first saw it. Because if ever there was an actor with a little leprechaun glint in his eye and an impish quality, it is Edmund Gwenn as Kris Kringle. And I knew a little bit about Edmund Gwenn because he had been in a science fiction movie I had seen in the theater called Them, where he played a scientist tracking these giant ants in the New Mexico desert, which is about as far away from Christmas as you can get. But Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, which is amazing that it was now, let's see, that's 76 years ago. And John Payne played the male lead. Maureen O'Hara was the female lead. And young Natalie Wood, at 8 years old, was so just delightful as the little girl whose mother has literally taught her to not believe in Christmas. Don't get into it. And I just thought that movie was completely charming. And interestingly, the role of Kris Kringle was first given to Cecil Kellaway, another wonderful character actor who turned down the role and recommended his cousin, who happened to be Edmund Gwenn.
That's also so terrific because George Seaton, who directed it, absolutely insisted upon shooting the Macy's Day Thanksgiving Parade. Oh, they fought him like crazy, the studio, but he won, and they shot and remember, you can't do a second take on that.
Well, not only did they shoot the parade, but they got Edmund Gwenn to play in the parade as Santa Claus. So apparently it was quite freezing that day, which is not surprising. It is the Macy's Day Parade. It doesn't come in hot weather. But
so, Steve, when did you initially see it?
I probably saw that in the mid-50s, on television, and I've probably seen it every year since. Of course, it was remade, I believe, in the 80s with Richard Attenborough as Kris Kringle. Little Mara Wilson was the little girl. It is a perennial. It is truly a perennial, and it's shot in black and white. There's a wonderful supporting cast and true emotion.
I love the movie. I feel the same way. I thought it was terrific. They did a Broadway play based on it called Here's Love. It was an interesting thing. Started out with Craig Stevens and Janice Page, and a guy named Lawrence Naismith was the Edwin Gwen character, was Kris Kringle.
I know.
The interesting thing, it did so well that when Craig Stevens left, guess who came in? John Payne, the original in the movie.
Oh, wow.
He came in and did the Broadway play.
By the way, here's a bit of trivia about John Payne. I discovered that he was one of the first actors to acquire an option on a James Bond novel. He had the rights to make Moonraker back in the 50s. He was going to play Bond. Unfortunately, back in the 50s, nobody really gave a hoot about James Bond, and it didn't work. But I tried to get in touch with John before he passed away. Unfortunately, I was unable to do it. But I always liked him. He was on a Western series in the 50s called The Restless Gun, one of innumerable Western shows in the 1950s. And I just have a real soft spot in my heart for that movie.
Well, it's a perennial. But I think, generally speaking, it's worth talking about why Christmas movies have become such a great genre. And I think really it has as much to do with what Christmas is all about as these movies. Christmas is the greatest family holiday. It celebrates peace, will, and goodwill towards men. Remember that one, Julian, as a kid?
Oh, I sure do.
Goodwill towards men.
Seems that's gone out the window with a lot of other.
Well, yeah, but it's a cozy holiday. It's family. It's snow. It's if you're in an area where there is snow, but it evokes all kinds of good things, and it makes people feel good, and that now gets to movies, which also possess, in many cases, great Christmas songs, Christmas music. You begin with White Christmas, which is the daddy of them all, Irving Berlin. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas from Meet Me in St. Louis. There's so many Christmas songs that go hand in hand, or they use as source music in certain movies like Home Alone, and you'll hear the great songs. So Christmas movies are special. There's no question about it. There's different kind of Christmas movies, and all of a sudden you see Die Hard, a movie like that involves Christmas. Is that a Christmas movie? Well, it has to do with Christmas in some way, but
I don't know if it's goodwill towards men as the theme of that one. It's more like shoot most of the men.
Right, right. But it includes Christmas. Some people would say, well, that's a Christmas movie. I'm not so sure that it is, but there's probably dozens upon dozens of Christmas movies.
Oh, yeah. Julian, what were you going to say?
I wanted to say one thing about Miracle on 34th Street, which I think we all who have been in distribution will be interested in. Despite the movie, and despite what Arthur and I and all of us know, Steve and Mike, that Christmas, those 10 days are great, Daryl Zanuck said it's opening in the summer. What? Daryl, the summer? Yeah, he said, because the summer's the best playing time. It's not just 10 days, it's a few months. And I'm opening this movie in the summer. And they did. That's kind of interesting.
Did it do passable business?
Yeah, it did. It did. But it got, as often these films do, it got better as time went on.
But as we all know, though, that when a movie is launched at Christmas and succeeds, it goes way beyond Christmas in terms of box office.
I interviewed George Seaton back in the 70s. He directed one of my favorite World War II movies, a film called 36 Hours with Rod Taylor and James Garner. Very nice man. I think he was always partnered with William Perlberg. They were a team, and he brought a lot to Miracle on 34th Street.
Yeah, right. Perlberg Seaton was a big company producing.
Mike, do you have a favorite Christmas movie?
Of course I do. Who doesn't have a favorite Christmas movie out there? That's the great thing about it. For me, one of my favorite Christmas movies actually was the very first Lethal Weapon movie. was a Christmas movie. And
What was it, Mike?
Lethal Weapon with
Lethal Weapon. Ah, well,
yeah, with Danny Glover and what's his name? You know, that guy. We're not really talking about anymore. So
Mel baby, yes.
I know Mel Gibson, but yeah, you know, that's a wonderful one. But for me, you know, growing up, you know, a Christmas movie like Miracle on 34th Street was always a go-to for me. And growing up in, you know, northern New Jersey, you knew all the places where they were because you went into Manhattan all the time. And, you know, you went to Macy's, you went to, you know, all the department stores. And it was always like, oh, that is, you know, it's just wonderful. But then, you know, as I got older, when I started watching a lot of more of the classic films, White Christmas all the way. It's like, that's like, for me, that's like the perfect.
How about White Christmas is one of the simplest, most wonderful. It's great. It's just simple. You don't have to think much. And they've got the song, you know.
Give us a couple bars, Arthur, because you're a professional singer.
Well, I will tell you, I'm not a professional singer. I was at one time, but the part of that song that most people don't know is the verse of the song. We all know I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. We all know that. But the truth of the matter is that, as the story goes, Irving Berlin, who wrote it way back when, walked out of Beverly Wilshire Hotel lobby. It was about December 14 thereabout, and took a look and saw a Santa Claus in Bermuda shorts, and he became totally depressed. So he walked back into, this is a true story as I understand it, I've read it. He walked back into the lobby where they used to have these little desks and stationery, and on the stationery, he sat there, he thought for a couple of minutes, and he wrote the following: "The sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, LA. But it's December the 24th, and I am longing to be up north." And the rest, of course, is history. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. But it's a perfect song. But most people don't know that verse. Oh, I will tell you, I was happy with my wife to be at Irving Berlin's 100th birthday celebration at Carnegie Hall. And every popular singer, including Frank Sinatra, Natalie Cole, everybody was there singing one of Berlin's songs. It was televised on CBS 2 weeks later. He was still living, and he was ill at home at the time, so they televised. They showed they had a private viewing for him when he was at home. But every one of those great songs that he wrote. I mean, the guy was ridiculous. He wrote epics, Easter Parade, certainly White Christmas, I'll Be Loving You Always. And every one of these singers, Sinatra sang, I'll Be Loving You Always. It was a great show, which you can probably see on YouTube. But what stopped the show was Rosemary Clooney, who came out and sang White Christmas and used that verse. And it was mesmerizing. And so, you know, there's White Christmas.
The movie that, to me lately, perfectly captures Christmas for a contemporary audience is Richard Curtis's Love Actually, which is a movie that it's like my contemporary Miracle on 34th Street. I just can't not watch that movie. It gets me into the spirit, and it's a very well-written script.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. It captures that feeling, the warmth. It's in England, correct? They shot that in England?
Yes.
And it has like literally everybody's in it. I mean, Colin Firth, Hugh Grant, Emma Thompson, Liam Neeson, Laura Linney, Bill Nighy. I mean, it's just Rowan Atkinson. There's that wonderful moment where, and Alan Rickman is trying to buy a gift for his secretary, and his wife's in the same department store. He's trying to buy it quickly so his wife doesn't see it. And Rowan Atkinson plays the clerk who's wrapping up his jewelry item. And the way he stretches it out, I thought that Alan Rickman was going to throttle the guy. It was just one of those classic moments. It's a movie filled with classic moments.
How about the ending?
Oh, it's a great ending. I mean, we don't want to give any spoilers here for the 4 people in the entire universe who haven't seen this movie, but it has
it's a perfect ending. It's one of the great endings of movies.
Oh yeah, no, of course, and the little boy, Thomas Sangster. He's now obviously an adult because this movie, by the way, is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. That movie's 20 years old.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a little boy, my personal favorite Christmas movie ever, I saw initially in a screening room in about 1983 or 84, and loved it, and I've loved it ever since. It's called Christmas Story. Little Ralphie, Darren McGavin, Blythe Danner, I believe. What a great! Do you guys all ever see that?
Just shoot your eye out, kid.
Yeah, right. So the kid
Isn't it called A Christmas Story? I believe you.
Well, it may be. But the thing is that a gentleman named Gene Shepard, who used to be on radio in New York City, had a great voice, wrote this story. And he is if you watch it, when you watch it, you'll hear the voiceover narration is all Gene Shepard. And the movie is directed by a guy named Bob Clark, who actually directed Porky's, something antithetical to this, but which was a breakthrough movie, which came after Animal House, but preceded American Pie. But Porky's was there, right?
And I worked on Porky's too. I worked with Bob Clark.
Okay. Well, he directed Christmas Story. I would defy anybody to tell me that there's a better Christmas movie than maybe there's a lot of films that are as good. But Christmas Story is special. It has all the warmth and it has all those good feelings, and it has a bad Santa Claus who the kids go to visit, and he's not a very happy guy sitting up on his pedestal. But it's a charming film.
I think part of its beauty is that it's told through the eyes of a little boy. I think that helped enormously.
Yes, but it captures it perfectly. I think they did it out of Milwaukee or somewhere in Minnesota or something. But it's just terrific. My daughter, who is now a woman, of course, and has her own 2 children, they watch it every Christmas time. They have a party, which, by the way, is not unique because it happens all over the country, apparently, maybe all over the world, where people will watch A Christmas Story and have their own family gathering and enjoy it year after year. So it's become
if we're talking about family viewing experiences, I don't know how you can top It's a Wonderful Life in terms of the ultimate family experience. And it's a movie I did not discover until it came on television years later. This movie was released a year before Miracle on 34th Street in that post-war year of 1946. It was nominated for 5 Oscars, and it picked the wrong year to come out because that was the year, as you point out, Arthur, the year of the best years of our lives, which won everything that year. And Jimmy Stewart was nominated for Best Actor. Frank Capra was nominated for Best Director. The picture was nominated for Best Picture, as well as sound and editing. It's interesting. Jimmy Stewart comes out of World War II very traumatized, as I'm sure you guys know. He was a colonel and commanded a U.S. bomber squadron in World War II. He was right up there in the clouds dropping bombs on Germany and leading men into battle, and it was terribly traumatic. He didn't want to do this movie, and of all people, the gentleman who played Potter, and Julian's going to remember his name, Lionel Barrymore, was the one who convinced him to make the movie. And I think Jimmy, used to say when he was living that this was his favorite performance. And, when he cries in that movie, supposedly, there are real memories that was part of his post-traumatic stress disorder that made him cry. And he was traumatized by the war. But
who was his wife? Who portrayed his wife?
Donna Reed.
Thank you.
Donna Reed.
But let's talk about the original casting. It wasn't supposed to be Donna Reed. It was supposed to be Gene Arthur. Because remember, Jimmy Stewart and Gene Arthur and Frank Capra together did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and You Can't Take It With You. So the time he wanted Capra, he wanted them all together again. And Gene Arthur turned it down, and they went to Ginger Rogers. She turned it down, and finally Donna Reed took the role.
And became a star afterwards,
And this
but you guys have to know something. I don't think in the history of movies I've seen a better list of writers who did not get credit but worked on It's a Wonderful Life. I don't know if you have any idea. You have Clifford Odets. You've got Dalton Trumbo. You've got Dorothy Parker. You've got the people who did it, Francis and Albert Hackett, Francis Goodrich. Hackett, and Capra.
Why weren't they credited, Julian?
Because they didn't use a lot of their stuff.
Oh.
I mean, for example, Dalton Trumbo wanted Bailey, Henry Bailey, was that his name? I think it was. Anyhow, George Bailey, right. He wanted him to be a politician who runs, loses, and then decides to commit suicide. So that was totally different than what we found in the actual movie with the banker and Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore had played on radio Ebenezer Scrooge. Huh. And when Capra heard him, he thought he would be perfect for the role of the banker.
Lionel Barrymore was the easiest imitation for anybody to ever do. There used to be guys and comedians in those days that would do Charles Boyer. They go, Charles Boyer, like that.
A fast
Jimmy Cagney was, oh, you dirty rat, But Lionel Barrymore was simply, yes. It was just, yes, how you do? It was emphasizing any word.
Well, the movie was based on a short story called The Greatest Gift. I don't think it was ever published. Somehow it got to Capra. I don't even think it was developed first at his company. And by the way, as you guys know, Capra had started a film company with William Wyler and one other director, I can't remember the name, called Liberty Films. And this was their debut film. And unfortunately, the budget kept on going up and up. It's interesting in researching this. Bedford Falls, that town with multiple blocks of storefronts and shops, etc., was all built. They didn't go to a real town and put up Christmas decorations. They built this on a lot in L.A. And the movie, which, as we know, takes place during Christmas, was shot during a heat wave. So all that phony snow material had to be brought in. And the budget rose to $3.7 million in 1946 dollars. That is a lot of money. And the initial domestic box office was only 3.3. So their freshman film lost money. And I think they only made one more movie, and then the company went out of business.
Well,
what's interesting about that movie?
The set that you talked about, I think at that time was considered the largest set ever built for a movie when they did that.
Huh?
Something, yeah.
A lot of hammering.
The master directors of the day, the Frank Capras, Preston Sturgis, a lot of those guys, they had several things in common, apart from being so great at details, like what happened in It's a Wonderful Life with the snow and the running in the street and all these things. They always cast the greatest supporting characters who became faces to people. We knew these people, we never knew their names, we didn't know most of their names, but they always had these great supporting characters. Frank Capra was perfect for that. He would cast the best supporting people, as would Sturgis and a number of others. But at that time, when you go to the movies in the late 40s or the early 50s, late 40s for sure, you were seeing a lot of the same faces in the great movies by the great directors.
Thomas Mitchell as Uncle Billy.
Yeah.
Ward Bond as Bert the cop. Frank Phelan as Ernie the taxi driver. And by the way, over the years, they've said that the names of Bert and Ernie on the Muppets were named after the two characters from It's a Wonderful Life. That has been proven to be false, but it's
Steve, I think Ward Bond may have been in more hit movies than anybody. All those John Wayne movies,
Everything that John Ford did, he put Ward Bond in.
Ward Bond.
But here's a good story about Thomas Mitchell playing Uncle Billy. He is in a scene where he's drunk and he's stumbling out of the party. And off the set is a technician who drops a bunch of props. And there's this terrible noise. But Mitchell smartly says, I'm all right, off camera. And Capra said, that's great, we'll keep that in. And that's how that got in. Kind of a funny story.
And here's another thing, one of the key characters, a little, side character, is Jimmy Stewart's daughter, who happens to be named Zuzu. Yeah. And I was curious about that name. And apparently, at that time, there was a snack item called a Zuzu Ginger Snap. And that's how the writers came up with the name of Zuzu. And in fact, if you listen to the dialogue, when Jimmy's character, George Bailey, comes home and sees his daughter who has a cold in bed, he calls her, Zuzu, my little ginger snap.
That was probably one of the first examples of product placement.
Exactly. And the American Film Institute declared it the #1 most inspirational film of all time.
Well, Capra being an engineer was very unhappy with how they made snow in those days, which was to take cornflakes and whiten them and throw them down. And what he didn't like was a lot of times the crunchy noises as the actors worked on it didn't work for him. So he went to the special effects people at RKO, and they came up with this foam that they use in fire extinguishers and put that with the ivory snowflakes. And from then on, Hollywood used his snow way of doing it. But it was his engineering background that got that into the movie.
Wouldn't cornflakes falling on actors' heads kind of cause a reaction?
I don't think so, but I never had a cornflake on my head.
Well, they'd have to dump a little milk. They'd have to dump a little milk on too, and then you could have some cereal. I actually produced a Christmas movie in 2001 called Silent Night, and it's a true story, a true World War II story of German and American combat troops who showed up at a cabin on Christmas Eve, 1944, and a German woman with some balls said, you got to keep your guns outside. And these German Americans broke bread, they sang songs, and in the morning they left as friends. True story. And we shot it up in Montreal for the Hallmark Channel in 2002. And we got Linda Hamilton to play the German woman. Now, of course, Linda Hamilton is known as from the Terminator movies. And appropriately, she terminates the violence in Silent Night and gets them to, break. She played a very credible, German woman. And the film was nominated for 4 Canadian Television Academy Awards. I'm very proud of this movie. The incident itself was mentioned by Ronald Reagan when he went to the Bitburg Cemetery in Germany during his presidency. There was a bit of a controversy at that time because there are SS officers buried at Bitburg, but he mentioned this incident because he knew that it was true.
Who was with Linda Hamilton, Steve? Who were the co-stars?
All Canadian actors. Did
you have any music in that, Steve?
We had some good music. It was a fairly small budgeted movie. We didn't have a lot of money to make it, but I did want to mention the fact that, like It's a Wonderful Life, we filmed in Montreal during the summer. Obviously, It's a Wonderful Life was shot in LA, but we had to make snow in a city which gets a ton of it in the appropriate season. And the snowmaking device in 2001 was something called Snowbiz, which came in these giant plastic bags. You put them in front of the wind machine and you got your snowflakes. So they keep developing new interesting ideas. But it was fun also. They come out to the set with these giant dump trucks filled with giant ice blocks, and they put them in a crusher, and then they get a guy with a hose, and he hoses down the whole set and creates the ground cover, which is all snow. It's very, very methodical.
We should point out that It's a Wonderful Life did not do well at the box office. Right. The Academy, though, as you say, recognized it with 5 Academy nominations, including Best Picture, and it took the film falling temporarily into the public domain for the public to discover it, because television stations could pick it up and pay no money except for the cost of a print, and it played everywhere for years and became this huge film that Steve rightfully says AFI called the most inspirational film ever.
Exactly. I actually I had a little talk show back in the 90s, and I got one of the kids to come on the show, played the older son, and he talked about what a special experience it was. And it's magic, and Christmas magic is doubly magical. We should mention that one of the biggest successes in Christmas movies starred Jim Carrey. It was called The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. And I remember seeing that, and that was, talk about an actor putting himself in. I think for 92 days, Jim Carrey spent 2 hours in the makeup chair every morning and an hour at night to get off that makeup playing the Grinch. So that is really dedication to the role. And I thought it was a lot of fun. You guys remember it, right?
Oh, sure.
Remember it well, but I also remember a movie called Home Alone, which is probably the biggest box office hit of all Christmas movies. And they got, I think, 2 or 3 sequels out of it. But the premise of, the kid being home alone and the parents somehow leaving or going on a plane and forgetting him. And he has two guys trying to break into the house. Wow, come on.
If you think about logical elements of screenplays, the thought that a family forgets their kid is a lot to swallow, but it works in the course of that movie because they cast the perfect actor to play the kid, Macaulay Culkin. What an adorable kid. That photo forever of him being shocked is just such an iconic photo.
Well, they also the premise of 2 kind of like stupid gangsters, hoodlums it becomes him against these 2 guys. Joe Pesci is one. Joe Pesci, out of character, but he was fantastic.
Daniel Stern is the other.
And Daniel Stern is the other guy. But Daniel Stern was not originally cast. Again, that's one of those things. And I think they shot film with the other guy, whoever that was, before they decided to take him out.
I think it was Daniel Roebuck who came in, and they weren't happy with him.
But the movie was shot in a gymnasium somewhere in Chicago, Illinois. All those Christmas feelings. They shot the exteriors. They got the money shot out of an exterior of a home in Chicago, somewhere suburb of Illinois. But the interiors were done essentially in a gymnasium, an empty school, high school. Was the house and all these things that looked like it was winter and Christmas was happening. Great movie.
That's a John Hughes movie. And of course, John Hughes was really centrally based in Chicago. Most of his movies, including Ferris Bueller and Breakfast Club, are all set in and around Chicago. And wonderful filmmaker. I worked with him. I was his unit publicist on Pretty in Pink, which he shot before Home Alone. And he's I think part of the reason that Home Alone works so well, once again, you have the focus on the kid's story. It's all seen through his eyes. And John Hughes had an amazing ability to get into kids' heads, whether they were young kids or teenagers.
Ned Tannen, who was the head of a production at the time at Universal, told me that John Hughes, to him, is the only writer he ever met who vomited script. It just kept coming out, script. The most difficult thing a writer can do is write a screenplay. But John Hughes was just one of those people who just kept coming out and coming out. And what a series of hits he had. And unfortunately died at, 49 years old or something?
Terrible.
Very sad. Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah. He was great. But he did write Home Alone.
The interesting thing about writers, if they came from television, which Hughes did not, but if they came from television, they could really rewrite and write quickly. Neil Simon being, of course, the greatest example of that. But Larry Gelbart, Woody Allen, these guys started in TV and they had to keep writing quickly. There was no time. And it was amazing to see sometimes between the dress rehearsal and going live, they wrote do sketches. It was a crazy time. but those were the guys who could really do it. But Hughes, as you say, Arthur, was he had a run that was really unbelievable as a writer director,
and they were all hits.
They were. I think. In fact, Macaulay Culkin had appeared in a previous John Hughes movie called Uncle Buck with John Candy, and I think that there was some hesitancy at first to hire Macaulay. In fact, I think it was reported that John Hughes looked at 300 or 400 little boys before realizing he had his kid in his own backyard.
Yeah, yeah. I worked with Macaulay in New York on a play where he was older and wonderful young man to work with. He was totally professional, on time, always knew his lines, and was a joy to be around. Yeah.
There is a little movie that was made in the late 1940s that has caught on television. And it was just a little thing, and now they play it every year, and people love it. It's called "It Happened on Fifth Avenue," with Don DeFore, with Victor Moore, I believe his name is.
It is.
He's a homeless guy who finds his way into a mansion every Christmas by going through the basement or something, and lives there and smokes cigars. The guys come home and they live in the house and no one knows who they are. It's just so simple and easy to take, but the public loves this movie. It Happened on Fifth Avenue. You'll probably see it on TCM sometime in the next 2 weeks. There was also a movie that Eddie Fisher made with Debbie Reynolds and Adolphe Menjou called A Bundle of Joy, which plays every Christmas. Not a great movie, but it's nice, And then there's Susan Slept Here with Dick Powell and Debbie Reynolds. That works. Again, these are nice, comfortable little movies that have Christmas all over it for anybody listening. And by the way, when Julian mentioned earlier, we were talking about Frank Capra. If you haven't read a book called The Name Above the Title, which is Frank Capra's autobiography, I really suggest you read it. It's one of the great books. I read it so many years ago. That's what a story. Immigrant who comes over from Italy and steerage.
As I recall, one of his later films I feel like it had a Christmas flavor, Pocket Full of Miracles with Betty Davis.
Yes.
Yeah. And Peter Falk and Glenn Ford.
Right. And Hope Lang.
And Mickey Shaughnessy.
And
Mickey Shaughnessy. It's one of the things that we were talking about earlier with It's a Wonderful Life and Lionel Barrymore playing Mr. Potter. The FBI had decided that this could be a communist film during the McCarthy period because the banker was the villain. Oh. And that's how they would supposedly inject the commie philosophy by making the rich man the bad guy. So that was investigated and found to be, like a lot of what they investigated, total crap.
So in those days, FBI agents had a little too much time on their hand. They should have been nabbing the
Al Capone,
the John Dillingers of the day.
One quick story about Lionel Barrymore. I was friendly with Dory Sherry, who had run both RKO and MGM. And when he left RKO, he went to MGM, and he was told by the East Coast brass, you've got to go and talk to all the stars and introduce yourself. So he went around and saw Clark Gable and whoever, Spencer Tracy, and he then decides to go and meet Lionel Barrymore on a sound stage. And he's waiting for him. They have an appointment, and in his wheelchair comes Lionel Barrymore, and he says, "Oh, Mr. Barrymore, my name is Dory Sherry. I'm now running the studio." And Barrymore looks up and says, "How old are you, young man?" And he says, "Dory," says, "Well, I'm 36 years old." And Lionel Barrymore said, "You must be some prick to be running a studio at 36 years old."
Oh.
Well, one of the movies that Dory Sherry brought over from RKO was a movie called Battleground. And I think Arthur and I could agree that Battleground could be termed a Christmas movie because it all takes place in the Battle of the Bulge. leading up to Christmas. Leon Ames comes on as the chaplain and talks about the reason people are fighting the war. And
he got Van Johnson in probably his most successful movie.
Yeah.
Battleground is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. And not until maybe 20 years ago did I learn that it was shot on the MGM lot. And I thought it was shot at the very least somewhere where there's snow and that kind of a climate in the United States, or maybe they were in Germany where they shot it. What a great movie that was.
Oh, yeah. The sets were just amazing. I got to know Robert Pyrosh very well, who wrote that and won the Oscar that year for Best Original Screenplay. And it's interesting. Some of the early photographic stills released by the publicity department showed Robert Taylor in the lead role and not Van Johnson. I think something happened and Robert Taylor had to leave the production. I'm not sure what it was. The director was William Wellman, who was known forever as Wild Bill Wellman, and a great director.
And Wings, right?
Right.
Yeah. John
Hodiak in Battleground.
Yeah, was also there.
I got to know Van Johnson. I spent a lot of time with him. He loved painting. He would paint these giant canvases like Guernica. I mean, there's huge canvases. I remember we went out for dinner one night and we're coming out of the restaurant and two elderly ladies who obviously recognized him ran over to him and said, "Oh my God, it's you. And he said, "Yes, it is. It's Van Heflin."
Love that.
Yeah, he had a great sense of humor.
It's not a Christmas movie, but he does this tap dancing number with Gene Kelly and Brigadoon, and they're just wowing the locals who've never seen tap dancing before, and it's just such a cool number. Yeah. And I've seen so many of his films. Let's think about this for a second. Has Van Johnson ever done a Christmas movie? I would think he would have. He seems very Christmassy.
Well, certainly, maybe the last scene of In the Good Old Summertime.
No, you're right, though, Steve. You're right. He does seem Christmassy. He was great. He had that warm, cozy kind of thing about it. He's a terrific actor.
And he was the number one box office star during the war.
Yes,
so many of them had gone to war, but he had a plate in his head. He had been in a terrible car accident, and so he didn't have to go at all.
Yeah. Oh.
I produced and directed a little film with him where he narrated and hosted called Going Hollywood the 40s. And he was terrific to work with. And he only required one thing, which was to take me to dinner afterwards to a Chinese restaurant. So that was what I did.
But in the golden age, he was probably as big a star as there was.
He was. And part of the reason was so many of the big stars had to go to war, and he was able not to. That doesn't take away from the fact that he was a movie star, certainly.
Yeah. Well, Christmas movies are special, and they do mirror the period that Christmas is, which lasts, I think, really from Thanksgiving right through Christmas and a little bit beyond. But people seem to be happier at that time. Is more family oriented. People think and feel, I think, more about kindness and peace and love and all these good things, and they're mirrored in some of these great Christmas movies we're talking about. You were talking earlier about some of the Goldwyn-isms. I've left a few out. I'm just going to bring them in real fast here. Okay, Sam Goldwyn, who was the Yogi Berra of movies, said other things that we discussed earlier, like, "I don't care if this movie doesn't make a nickel. I just want every man, woman, and child in America to see it." Okay? He said, "I'm willing to admit that I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong." Sam Goldwyn. Tell the actors to stand closer apart. And he said, "If I were in this business only for this business, I wouldn't be in this business." Speaking of the movie business. Great reaction to those guys. Thanks. So Sam says hi.
Well, Louis B. Mayer used to have a lot of yes men around him. And one of them, one day he asked each one about the film. And they told him how great it was. And finally, this one guy said, "LB, it's colossal." and L.B. Mayer said supposedly merely colossal.
All right, so I have to ask the question. We've talked about Christmas movies for an hour. Can anybody name a great Hanukkah movie?
Well, you certainly stumped the panel, I think.
Didn't Adam Sandler do something with that, or was that just a song?
He created the Hanukkah song. Put on your yarmulke. It's time for Hanukkah. Yeah, it's one of the funniest songs in the history of songs. But I think that, guys, there probably is a great Hanukkah movie somewhere in somebody's typewriter. Their computer these days. It'll probably be made, and there probably is a great Kwanzaa movie as well.
Actually, Adam Sandler did a movie called 8 Crazy Nights. It was an animated version.
Oh, you're right. There you go. There you go. There you go.
Mike came up with it. The three of us was stumped, and that's why, Mike, you're the fourth guy with us.
He is our backstop.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas. What a song.
Yeah, have a lovely holiday, all our listeners.
Yes, everybody have whatever you celebrate. We hope you celebrate it well. If you do turn on the television, we recommend a bushel of the movies we've talked about. Probably the one that you're probably going to see is It's a Wonderful Life, because it's a ritual.
Yes.
By the way, I saw the colorized version. It just doesn't work the same way. It's kind of blasphemous to colorize a great black and white movie like that.
Colorization had about a minute and a half of fame, and it was terrible. It just didn't work.
By the way, here's something funny. You know, the scene in It's Wonderful Life where Donna Reed picks up a rock and throws it at the Old Bailey mansion or whatever it's called that breaks a window. They had a stunt person on hand to throw it because they figured Donna couldn't throw it. She threw a strike and broke the window on the first try, because she was athletic and had a great throwing arm. How about that?
Good one.
That's a
she
good
could have
one.
been a league of their own.
There you go. Mike started our show with a ho, 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 and he'll probably end with a ho, ho, ho. But that's that great moment in Die Hard where Bruce Willis kills that first guy, that first thief. I won't call him a terrorist because they think they're terrorists, but they're really just thieves. And he sees a little Christmas decoration, and he writes on the guy's shirt, ho, ho, ho.
Yeah,
he says, now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho. It was a good moment.
Hell of a movie.
Hell of a movie. And then the sequel, Die Hard 2, also takes place during Christmas, set in the Denver airport.
Nope. Takes place in Washington, D.C.'s Dulles Airport.
Oh, you're right. It was Washington. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, if you've made it this far in the show, everyone, why don't you subscribe? It's free, and we are available on the Apple, Amazon, Spotify platforms, or wherever you get your great podcasts. We're also available now on Facebook and Instagram. We really appreciate it. And please don't hesitate to recommend us to your friends and family. We have an email address if you want to say anything positive or even a little negative. Just email us at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. We love letters of note. We appreciate it. And we love our fans, and we want to keep giving you great shows.
And having nothing to do with Christmas, here's the joke of the week, guys. A man inserted an ad in the classified section, wife wanted. Next day, he received 100 letters. They all said the same thing. You can have mine. That's what they said. All right.
And in the woke world, will they take that umbrance at that joke? That's the question.
I hope not.
I hope not to.
And we want to wish everybody a happy New Year. We want to wish everybody Merry Christmas, all happy holidays to all, good health to all, and keep coming back and saying hi to us.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everyone, and happy holidays.
Everyone these days could use a little support, and your friends at the ESO Network are no different. With the ESO Network Patreon, the cool thing is when you help support us, It's you who will benefit. With 4 tiers starting for as little as 25 cents a week, you can listen to some of your favorite network podcasts early, hear exclusive content, maybe get some ESO swag, or even possibly take a shot at the geek seat. All you need to do is sign up at patreon.com/ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.